Greetings and welcome to our YouTube channel. We are the Ministry of the Real Truth. Today we just happen to be perusing through the biblical scriptures and a thought came to mind. We were looking at this huge King James Version of the Holy Bible with the Renaissance paintings in it, Mary the Virgin, of the baby Jesus and Joseph, etc. And its index, history of the books of the Bible, concordance, dictionary, etc., etc. It's quite heavy, and this particular translation has the dedication letter to the then Prince James Stuart of Scotland, who became the King of England, by the translators and the people who said thank you very much for saving us from the popish rule, and suppression and all this sort of stuff. Okay, so we had a thought in our mind and we were thinking, who are the Jews, who are the real Jews, etc., that have come up in another video. And then we thought, well, who are the Assyrians, who are the people of Ashhur, etc., and we decided to have a look in the Biblical Dictionary of Ashhur, because at Ashhur, Ashur, it's the city of the Ashuri people, the Assyrians, in the Old Testament, and Ashur, the supposed 8th or 9th son of Jacob, because quite a while back a Jewess, a practicing Jew, tried to tell us that Ashur, Ashur, the son of Jacob, is actually the same as Ashur, Ashur, in the Bible. Incorrect, because Ashur not only was a name of a city, but also was the title of God. It's spelled Ashur in the Aramaic, but in the Greek it's spelled Assur. We found in this King James Bible that it had Ashur, so it's obviously a mistake. And then further on it had Ashur, another mistake, right? Because the Greeks didn't have the sound sh or sh in their language, so they wrote it as Assur, and that's what they did with the name of the country, Assyria. Okay, they put Awsyria. IA on the end is an N suffix, which means that that region that these people dwelled in was belonging to those particular people, the Assyrians, or those of Ashur, or Assyria, but Ashur. Yeah. And you have the N prefix ik, which means that the language that they had, they were possessors of this language. Okay? Their end suffixes. We go look that up on Google, on Mr. Google. So, in Aramaic is the language that Aram in the Bible used, the forefather of the Arameans. So they spoke Aramaic. Ashur. Okay, here's Ashur, Ashur. See Ashur, that's on Biblical Dictionary Index and Concordance, page 15. Okay, it has Ashur. See Ashur, Ashur. The proper spelling of it. So we looked at Assyrian. It has Assyria, Asshur, Ashur, or Assur, Assur. It reads, a once powerful country on the Tigris River, its capital was Nineveh, which was built by Nimrod, Genesis 10:11. Keep that in mind. It states there it was built by Nimrod. Records of the existence of this country date from as early as BC 2000. In the Bible, the later Assyrian Empire is mainly referred to as Ashhur. This empire flourished around the 8th century BC. Some of its outstanding kings are Tiglath-Pileser, Shalmaneser, and Sargon. In BC 722, Assyria carried captive the 10 northern tribes of Israel. Are they the 10 lost tribes? The prophecies of Nahum and Jonah are directed mainly to Assyria. It's got some more information in biblical verses there. Okay. See, that's what we noticed. It was actually spelt wrong. Did we mention that the Greeks didn't have the sh sound in their language, so they put it A-S-S-U-R, as they did with Assyria. A-S-S-Y-R-I-A. Okay. So we thought, well, we will also have a look at Genesis 10:12. To see what that had to say there. Let's go look at the notes for a second. Yeah, we were told by a Jewess that Ashhur was Ashhur, A-S-H-U-R was Ashhur, A-S-H-E-R, the grandson of Jacob. Well, no, actually he's the son of Jacob. The 8th or 9th son of Jacob. So we decided to have a look at Genesis 10, starting at verse 8. Nimrod as the first monarch, or the first king, and Cush begat Nimrod. In other words, Cush had a son. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He, this is Nimrod, was a mighty hunter before the Lord, wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom, Nimrod's, was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar, or Sumer, Ishuemia, because that's the desert region of Assyria. That's where the all men gathered and spoke one language. They were all in union, and they built that Tower of Babel in the land of Shinar or Sumer, that desert region. Out of that land went forth Ashhur. It's got A-S-S-H-U-R, obviously a mistake there, and builded Nineveh. Okay, supposedly Nimrod built Nineveh, and the city Rehoboth and Calah, and reasoned between Nineveh and Calah, the same as a great city. Okay, that's what it says in this big as King James Authorized Version. And what we found in the NIV may have been something similar or very different. Starting from 8. Cush was the father of Nimrod, who grew to be a mighty warrior on the earth. Not much difference here. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That is why it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The first centers of his kingdom were Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh and Shinar. From that land he went to Assyria, where he built Nineveh, Nimrod, Rehoboth, Calah, and Rezin, which is between Nineveh and Calah. That is a great city. So then we went to verify it a third time in the New English Bible with the Apocrypha. We've got plenty of Bibles, so we just grabbed that one because they were at hand, right? They were available. Okay. So Genesis 10, verse 8. Cush was the father of Nimrod, who began to show himself a man of might on earth. which is talking about Nimrod. He began to show himself a man of might on earth, and he was a mighty hunter before the Lord, as the saying goes, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. His kingdom in the beginning consisted of Babel, Erech, and Akkad, all of them in the land of Shinar or Sumer. From that land he migrated. Nimrod migrated. He went there to Ashhur, Asshur, and built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calah, and Rezin, a great city between Nineveh and Calah. So it's basically saying the same thing, that Nimrod built Nineveh, which we're going to show you in a second, from the original ancient sacred scribal, Old Tongue, Assyrian Aramaic, with Kitab Ashhur. This is the Lishan Artika Cypriot of the Assyrian Aramaic, or Syrian Aramaic, of the ancient, or the original ancient, very old, dead language Kitab Ashhur, that was revived using the root words of the vernacular, probably by native-born Aramaic speaking translator from Bet Narain, Mesopotamia, Assyria, Victor N. Alexander. His middle name is Nimrod because he's supposed to be a descendant of Nimrod, and also the Jews that came out of Egypt. That's what he stated, right? Okay, so looking at what does it say in Genesis 10 in these original manuscripts, copied and compiled by scribes and monks. This is a language that was spoken by the ancient Old Testament prophets, probably Moses or Isaiah, etc. Like that. They're copied and then compiled into one book, the Book of Books, or the Old Testament, around 800 BC in Ur-Hai, Edessa, now modern Turkey. And it reads from verse 8, Genesis 10 verse 8, and to Cush was born Nimrod, or Cush was born Nimrod, who began to be a giant of the earth. He was a lion-hearted giant before the Lord. That is why it is said, like Nimrod, a lion-hearted giant before the Lord. And he was the head of his kingdom, as a ruler obviously, which included Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Calah in the land of Sumer. From these lands there emerged the Ashurai, or the Ashurites, the people of Ashur, who built Nineveh and the towns of Rehoboth and Calah, and Rezin, the great city between Nineveh and Calah. So that's telling you that these Ashurai people built Nineveh, etc. It's not saying, as in the Americanized modern Bible versions, that he built it himself, that Nimrod built it. Okay. So we have here in your NIV, it says, out of that land went forth Ashhur, Asshur, and builded Nineveh. Okay? And the city Rehoboth and Calah. So there it's saying Ashhur built it. Right? Misspelling there. It should be Ashur if in the Aramaic. But maybe this is a mistake. Right? That's in your NIV. There's another version here. Yeah, that's the NIV, so that's the same thing. The other one must be a different version, probably King James or something like that. Not really sure. Okay, always who did it twice. Yeah, so basically it's saying the same thing. Okay, no, it's actually different in this one. It says, from that land he, Nimrod, went to Assyria, where he built Nineveh. Okay. See the difference? Okay. So what we're also looking at, now that's cleared up, is about the Hebrew and the Aramaic languages of first century Israel, because there's a lot of people out there that came at us and said, you don't know the Creator, you don't know this, you don't know that, you don't know nothing, right? You're this, you're that. So he found this website which states, because they're telling us about the Jewish and the Jewish language and the Hebrew and all this sort of stuff, and these people in these modern Bible versions have put in there, it's all translated from the original Aramaic, the Hebrew, Greek, etc., when it's not. Why? Because they're all dead languages. So you would probably have to use the root words of those modern versions, vernaculars, to be able to translate it from those original dead languages. Okay? Because it's been admitted that the Hebrew that's spoken in Israel today is a modern Hebrew, Israeli Hebrew. Okay? Well, we'll get to that. Hebrew and Aramaic languages of 1st century Israel. In an effort to deny the importance of Jehovah, okay, this is from Hope of Israel Ministries, Ecclesia of Jehovah, Hebrew and Aramaic languages of the 1st century Israel. In an effort to deny the importance of Jehovah, God's great name, they call him Jehovah, all different sort of names, right? In an effort to deny the importance of Jehovah, God's great name, there are those who erroneously contend that the New Testament was originally written in Greek. Is this true? Christianity today is tainted with Greek thinking, Hellenized creeds and unscriptural practices derived from Greco-Roman infusions through a Greek translated New Testament. When you examine all the evidence, it is clear that the New Testament was originally inspired in Hebrew or Aramaic and then later translated into Greek, probably classical like Attic Greek or Koine Greek. The testimony to this is voluminous and logical, as this article plainly reveals, and that's by John D. Keyser. And he states, the Middle East, through all of its political turmoil, has been dominated. Let's better put us up there, makes it a bit bigger. Move us up here. A bit bigger. So I can move. Okay. The Middle East, through all of its political turmoil, has been dominated by a single language group known as Semitic from the earliest times until the present day. During this time, the Semitic tongue of Aramaic dominated the three great empires, Assyrian, Babylonian and Persian. It endured until the 7th century when, under rising Islam, it was displaced by a cognate Semitic language, Arabic. You have the Nabatean, which is the grandparent. Okay. It's the parent language of the Hebrew, Aramaic and Syriac, and those three languages are the parent language of the Arabic, which is the child language of the Nabatean, the grandparent of Nabatean. Go look for that on Google, or look at Shaka Amos's video R.I.P. Moors, where he says you ask for it or something like that, and he explains it. Okay. So even today there are some Syrians, Assyrians and Chaldeans who speak Aramaic as their native tongue, including 3 villages north of Damascus. The Jewish people, through all of their persecutions, sufferings and wanderings, have never lost sight of their Semitic heritage, nor their Semitic tongue. This is going with the Assyrians as well, who were persecuted for about 20 centuries. Hebrew, a Semitic tongue closely related to Aramaic, served as the language until the Great Dispersion, that's when they were scattered, when a cognate language, Aramaic, began to replace it. Some dissension, like Aramaic was first, that's the one that God spoke to those at the Tower of Babel, etc., etc., and then he scattered them, giving them many languages to confuse them, etc., etc. Okay. Hebrew, however, continued to be used in their religious literature and is today the spoken language in the state of Israel. So he probably gave them the Aramaic Hebrew or the Hebrew Aramaic. The Babylonian Exile, some scholars have theorized that the Jews completely lost their Hebrew language, replacing it with the Aramaic during the Babylonian captivity. Nothing could be further from the truth. The children of Israel spent many years in captivity in Egypt. Supposedly they did not stop speaking Hebrew and began speaking Egyptian. Supposedly Moses learnt from his father or his grandfather, Kitab Hotep, but we haven't been able to find any information of that yet, as well as Kitab Ashhur, etc. Could be Hotep, it could be Hotep. So why should they exchange Hebrew for Aramaic after just 70 years in Babylonian captivity? Upon their return from the Babylonian captivity, it was discovered that a small minority of the Jews could not speak the language of Judah, so drastic measures were taken to prevent further erosion of the language. That these measures were successful is indicated by the fact that all of the post-captivity books of the Tanakh, Old Testament, Zechariah, Haggai, Malachi, Nehemiah and Ezra and Esther, are written in Hebrew rather than Aramaic. Yeah, there's supposedly some portions of Ezra, etc., contain the Aramaic. However, somewhere between 721 to 500 BC, the language of the people of Palestine shifted from Hebrew to Aramaic. Yeah, they were shifting forward, backwards, either, right? Apparently the Hebrew was, like, for religious purposes, spoken in the temples, and the Aramaic was for everything else on the outside, okay? Not within the temple. Therefore we know that Jesus and his disciples spoke Aramaic, Galilean Aramaic, and wrote in this language while preaching the message of Christianity. Well, they weren't Christians, so they weren't really pushing Christianity. That didn't come about till they didn't start calling themselves Christians supposedly until 300 years later. Okay, they were Mashiachai, followers of the Messiah. These disciples, because they didn't like the idea that these pagan Romans, for their many gods and sacrifices and stuff, gave them this borrowed, it's a loan word from the Greek Christos, which means slaves to the Christ, etc., etc. So they called themselves Mashiachai, followers of the Messiah. Okay, so they preached the message of the Christ in Palestine, Syria and Mesopotamia. Chaldeans, president and passed by Michael J. Bazzi, 1991, page 39, writes Bo Riker in the New Testament era, the word of the Bible from 500 BC to AD 100. Toward the end of the Judahite monarchy, Aramaic had already become the generally accepted language of commerce and politics in Syria and Palestine, 2 Kings 18:26, largely because of the importance of the kingdom of Damascus and the other Syrian states. In addition, the Assyrians and Babylonians had settled Aramaic-speaking peoples in Israel and Judah. During the exile, the Israelite and Judahite nobility adopted Aramaic because it was the international language and brought it with them when they returned to their former homeland. Because the Achaemenids accepted the dominance of Aramaic, they made it the official language of Syria and Palestine, Ezra 4:7, thus permitting a special imperial Aramaic to develop. Hebrew remained the language of the Jewish cult, but Aramaic gradually became the generally spoken language of Palestine. It remained the language of Jews and Christians in Palestine until late antiquity. This linguistic factor, to which Cyrus and the Achaemenids contributed, was essential to the intellectual and spiritual unity of Judaism. Fortress Press, Philadelphia, 1981, page 10. Hellenization. The period after Alexander the Great's conquest of Persia marked the beginning of the so-called Hellenistic Age, the time when there began a more rapid mixture of Greek culture and thought with other cultures. This period in history witnessed the conflict of empires and the breakdown of the city-states, a growth in individualism and rapid progress in science along with Greek thinking in the form of philosophy. The Hebrew people were defeated by Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon in 586 BC, when Jerusalem was destroyed and its remaining citizens deported. However, when the Persians under Cyrus the Great defeated the Babylonians, the Hebrew people returned to Judah from the lands of the captivity. Jerusalem was restored and Jehovah, God's temple, was rebuilt. Under Persian rule, the people of Judah maintained their religious form of government and also developed a distinguished literature. Alexander the Great's conquest of the land of Judah in 333 BC did not affect their status, but after Alexander's untimely death and subsequent division of his empire among his 4 leading generals, probably the Ptolemies, Hellenistic influence began in Judah and Greek religion was thrust upon its people. In the first third of the 2nd century BC, a group of wealthy Jewish aristocrats, probably the Alexander family, who were the tax collectors for the Romans, came into power. That's probably, it's not mentioning that there. Came into power in Palestine, who were attracted to the trappings of Hellenism. Yet even when Greek became the language of choice for literature, culture, politics and commerce among the elite, Aramaic remained as the language of the common people until the conquest of the Muslims in the 7th century AD, where they introduced the Aramaic language to the Near East. Ibid, page 341. The revolt of the Maccabees against the Hellenizers in 167 BC, Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, and those who followed him, was a direct result of the ruthless attempts to Hellenize the Jews. In other words, Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, wanted the Jews to worship his gods, celebrate his pagan religious holidays, and adhere to the laws of his Greek culture and language, which the religiously upright in Judah simply did not want to do. Some scholars have also suggested that under this pressure the Jews lost their Semitic language and in their rush to Hellenize began to speak Greek. However, Antiochus Epiphanes' attempts were short-lived, and in response the Jews formed an army led by Judas Maccabee. This army crushed the Greeks and eradicated Hellenism from the land. This military victory is celebrated as Chanukah to this very day, the feast of the dedication of the temple. Even Yeshua the Messiah seems to have observed this holiday at the temple in Jerusalem in the 1st century. Those who claim that the Jews were Hellenized and began speaking Greek at this time seem to overlook the historical fact of the Maccabean success. And there's more information there. It's quite lengthy. During the 1st AD, Hebrew remained the language of the Jews living in Judah and to a lesser degree in Galilee. Aramaic remained a secondary language and the language of commerce. Jews at this time did not speak Greek. In fact, one tradition has it that it was better to feed one's children swine flesh than to teach them the Greek language. That says a lot, since swine flesh is forbidden by the Torah and as a result spurned by the Jews, and it was only with the permission of the Jewish authorities that a young government official could learn Greek, and then solely for the purpose of political discourse on the national and international level. The Greek language was completely inaccessible and undesirable to the vast majority of Jews in Israel during the 1st century. The bottom line is that any gauge of Greek language outside of Israel cannot, nor any evidence hundreds of years removed from the 1st century, alter the fact that most of the Jews of Israel in the 1st century AD did not know Greek. Eusebius and the Messiah, I think they ask what language did the Messiah use in his daily intercourse with his followers and those who came in contact with him. The Greek bishop Eusebius, 263-339 AD, often referred to as the father of ecclesiastical history, offers a fascinating insight. Okay, we say he was speaking Galilean Aramaic because his followers were Galilean fishermen. Right. Thus it happened that when King Abgar, the brilliantly successful monarch, or he's called the Black, the brilliantly successful monarch of the people of Mesopotamia, who was dying from a terrible physical disorder, actually wrote a letter to Christ requesting that he come and heal him because he heard of his miracles, etc., etc. But the Christ says, well, I'm kind of busy at the moment. I'm on my father's, doing my father's will. I'm on my mission. I can't come at the moment, but later on I'll send somebody. And apparently he might have sent Ananias, and then maybe Thomas or someone like that, Adai or Thaddeus or whoever, went to him with the shroud of, they used to cover Christ when he died, and he was wrapped up and he's put in the tomb, right? And somebody along the way stole it and ended up in Turin. Okay, so Christ couldn't make it, so someone else was sent there. Okay, so Eusebius goes on to show a copy of a letter written by Abgar. There's some dispute that it's actually authentic by these modern scholars and theologians. The top ark to the Messiah and delivered to him at Jerusalem by the courier Ananias, and then the Messiah's reply to Abgar delivered by the courier Ananias, both translated from the original Syriac by Eusebius. Now Syriac is simply another term for Aramaic as the modern derivative. So we have the modern derivative of that today. So this passage clearly shows that the Messiah was familiar with and carried out his daily task in the Aramaic language. Eusebius goes on to say, page 67, that to these letters is subjoined the following in Syriac Aramaic. Then, on page 70 of his work, he concludes by saying, here we may leave for the present this valuable document, the letters to and from the Messiah, literally translated from Syriac Aramaic. And he goes on about Josephus. We read that he's a turncoat, working for the Romans, etc., etc. And he had something to say there. Evidence of archaeology, language of the New Testament. Christ himself spoke Aramaic and could have known only such parts of Hellenistic culture as trickled into Galilee. Behind the Gospels lie a lost Aramaic version of the teachings of Christ. Chester G. Starr, A History of the Ancient World, 1991, page 681. And that's why we at the Ministry of the Real Truth bring you the supposed hidden and preserved, or hidden therefore preserved, original ancient Galilean Aramaic manuscripts translated into English by a native-born Aramaic-speaking Mesopotamian, or from Bet Narim, Mesopotamia, and Assyria, translator with 15 years' experience in translating those particular manuscripts from the original Church of the East. Okay, that's what we're all about. That's what our channel is all about. Just putting more information here. Testimony of the probably Roman or the Western Church Fathers. Okay, lots more information there. We'll leave the link down below so you can go have a look at it yourself and read it in your own time. Okay, says here, by 325 AD, anti-Semitism and the priority given in the West to the Greek scriptures has solidified. Constantine the Great invaded Rome, making himself emperor. He then proclaimed, quote, Christianity, unquote, to be the Catholic, or the universal, that's what Catholic means, worldly, globally, universal religion, thus making, quote, Christianity, unquote, the enforced state religion of the Roman Empire. Before this occurred, one could be killed for being a Christian. After it occurred, one could be killed for not being a Christian. Constantine, who was a rabid anti-Semite, supposedly, converted the Council of he convened the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD to standardize Christianity. Jews were excluded from the meetings, and Jewish practices were officially banned, and the Greek translations officially replaced the original Semitic scriptures. Okay. More information there. And we have look at further, and we're asking, is ancient Hebrew a dead language? Because many rabbis, etc., out there saying, oh yeah, we the modern the Hebrew today is translated from the Kitab Ivri, the sister language of the original ancient, very old Assyrian Aramaic, or Kitab Asherit, or Ashuri. Okay? When we see that it's not, it's modern Israeli Hebrew, and some rabbis admit, it's modern. Okay? It's not that very old, or that original ancient, very old, dead language, for various different reasons. Okay, is ancient Hebrew a dead language? By William P. Griffin. The typical Hebrew grammar devotes a great deal of space to the intricacies of Masoretic pointing, and many who teach elementary Hebrew have similar emphases. Students are taught proprotonic reduction, the rule of Shewa, and countless other rules of vowel patterns, each with many exceptions. Why does this have a patak instead of a kametz? They then move to verb paradigms, where they encounter further lists of exceptions, when to include the dagesh, variations for gutturals, and so forth, and they have only encountered the kal. Our students, who by and large are anything but linguists, encounter statements like, quote, the verb double R or differs from SW double B in one way. In the second and first position forms, singular and plural, the geminate consonant rejects the dagesh forte, and the pathak under the aleph becomes kametz due to compensatory lengthening. 1. When there is an unaccented syllable followed by a, and so forth. Next comes the peel with its multitude of variations. These students are not merely expected to know that such vowel patterns exist, but they are expected to be able to reproduce them as well. We then wonder why people regard Hebrew as a hard language, and why attrition rates are so high. The answer is this: we are not teaching one language but two. If we emphasize the accents, make 2.5. We demand that our students understand and replicate an elaborate cellophane overlay that is more complicated than the language it attempts to clarify. This person proposes that they peel back this layer and focus on what is underneath. To many, the notion of de-emphasizing Masoretic pointing probably sounds foolish at best or heretical at worst, and one suspects that this has never even occurred to others. Yet this person would urge that we consider doing so for the following reasons, etc., etc. Historical reasons for de-emphasizing Tiberian pointing, and so forth. The point of the above summary of the early history of Hebrew is this: there are a variety of reasons based on the history of the language to call into question a rigid adherence to Tiberian pointing. 1. Strictly speaking, classical biblical Hebrew is a dead language. You're talking about the Ketav Ivri, it's a dead language. It is as dead as Akkadian, Ugaritic, Sumerian or Koine Greek. And this writer states, we are dealing with a fixed set of texts, not the Hebrew spoken in the nation of Israel today. Israeli Hebrew, that's what it is, it's a modern Hebrew, has significant differences from biblical Hebrew. There you go. While the verb forms are by and largely biblical, not only were all the archaic forms of BH rejected, but also biblical Hebrew rejected, but also the consecutive tenses, the cohortative, the infinite, absolute more or less, and the infinite construct, except for the plus lamed and plus bet, infinitive forms. The syntax is heavily influenced by a combination of Mishnaic Hebrew and European languages. Some biblical vocabulary is either rejected or substantially modified as to its usage. And, quote, it has been calculated that some 10% of the words in Hebrew dictionaries might be of foreign, usually Western origin. It could be a Latinized Hebrew for all we know. In Hebrew dictionaries might be of foreign, usually Western origin. Further, the pronunciation system is basically Sephardic, not Ashkenazic or Yemenite. 2. However, while the Masoretes preserved a pronunciation and interpretive tradition, vowel points are not original. This should be important whether one views the Hebrew Bible as Holy Scripture. It is only the consonantal text that was canonized, or sees the text as a source of information for reconstructing the history of the religion of Israel. People wrote, read and learned Hebrew in ancient times up through the latter part of the first millennium CE without vowel pointing. 3. Similarly, Masoretic pointing should be treated with a skeptical eye, whether one uses it for pronunciation or interpretation. The Masoretes applied a fairly consistent pronunciation system to a collection of texts that cover, depending upon your perspective, up to 1,000 years. It would be difficult to argue that any language maintained the same pronunciation over a 1,000-year period or even 500 years, let alone Hebrew. Further, even consonantal indicators in the Hebrew Bible, such as Sibboleth, Shibboleth, Samek, Sheen, DG 12:6, show that pronunciation differences existed at the same time in different regions, and so forth. Masoretic pointing preserves a liturgical reading for a text that by and large was not intended to be read liturgically. This includes odd features such as quote in pause unquote, i.e. where pronunciation changes because of a word's position in a verse, e.g. lak for leka, which looks like a feminine form being used in place of a masculine one. And it goes on about the Tiberian pointing. It's just excuses. Why do people take Hebrew? This author was struck by Charles Isbell's 2005 article in the SBL forum. The Hebrew teacher, guru, drill instructor or role model. He noted that there are a variety of reasons people take Hebrew and that these differ greatly for Jews and Christians. For Jews, they are mainly interested in using the Hebrew Bible in worship services, and they want to leave the door open for learning modern Hebrew. Christians, on the other hand, learn Hebrew primarily because they want to translate and interpret the Hebrew Bible so as to buttress their understanding of their own faith, and are really interested in learning the modern version, and so forth. Okay, William P. Griffin Evangel University. Excuse me. Dusty in this room. Ancient versus Modern Hebrew Script. This is by Aish Rabbi at the Aish Rabbi website. It's known that the ancient Israelites wrote in a totally different script of Hebrew than the one used today. Note that. It's known that the ancient Israelites wrote in a totally different script of Hebrew than the one used today. And this is coming from this person here, the Aish Rabbi, not from us. Wouldn't the earlier one have been the original script of Hebrew, the one the Torah was given in? If so, how could it have been changed later? On the one hand, we are so concerned that a Torah scroll be written perfectly, with perfectly formed letters, but on the other hand, the letters would seem to have no sanctity. They are just an adopted script from later on in our history. This is probably someone asking a question towards this to this Aish Rabbi, and the Aish Rabbi replies, "It's a very important issue. You are quite right that ancient Hebrew was written in a completely different script from the modern, or that spoken today, right? Or whenever it was modernized, and today. This ancient script is known as Katav or Tav Ivri, or the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet. It resembles the Phoenician alphabet of the time. The modern one is known as Katav Ashhur, literally the Assyrian script. It closely resembles the ancient Aramaic alphabet and became adopted by the Jews shortly after they were exiled to Babylonia after the destruction of the first temple. They went to Ur of Chaldee, supposedly, Abraham and his people, or Abraham was actually born in, and they adopted the Assyrian created the Assyrian Aramaic. These people were Chaldeans. They lived in the era of Chaldee. That's where Abraham was born. But they also referred to it as Babylonia. The two alphabets have identical letters and bear some resemblance, but are quite distinct. All of the older archaeological finds of written Hebrew were in this ancient script, while from around the 5th century BCE, with the return of many Jews from Persia, the newer script became common. Even at that point, Tav Ivri still continued to be used. Coins have been discovered from as late as the Bar Kokhba rebellion, 132 to 36 CE, with Tav Ivri inscriptions. All of this begs the question you raised: does this mean the script of the Torah itself changed? If the proper and original script of Hebrew is Tav Ivri or Tav Ivri, how could later generations begin using a different script, changing the form of the Torah itself? The Talmud, Sanhedrin 21b to 22a, addresses this issue and explains that it was done through divine sanction. In Deuteronomy 17:18, the Torah instructs that a Jewish king must write for himself a copy of the Torah, Mishneh HaTorah, which can equally be translated a changed Torah. From this, the sages saw an allusion to the fact that the text of the Torah scroll would eventually change. Likewise, the book of Ezra 4:7 refers to a letter the Jews of Israel wrote to the Persian king Artaxerxes in a changed script written in Aramaic with Aramaic characters. From this, the sages likewise deduced that the script of the Jews had officially changed to the Assyrian script. It's a square script, right? Nearly identical to the Aramaic. So the Aramaic's a square script? Yes? No? Maybe? In fact, as the Talmud points out, this is perhaps the reason why shortly beforehand, when the famous writing on the wall appeared in Belshazzar's palace on the fateful night of his death, Daniel 5, no one was able to interpret it, although no doubt many Jews were present. The message was written in Assyrian Hebrew, or possibly Syrian Aramaic, which not even the Jews could make out until Daniel interpreted it with divine inspiration. This was the point in time in which God officially sanctioned that Hebrew would now be written in a different script. The Talmud there records a further debate if Hebrew began in the Paleo-Hebraic script and changed to the Assyrian, or if it began as Assyrian, changed to Paleo-Hebraic, and then changed back in Ezra's time. As the Talmud and commentators explain, the Assyrian script is the ideal and more sacred one. But when Israel became sinful during the First Temple period, they were no longer worthy of it and began writing in the more crude Paleo-Hebraic script. Only in the time of the great scribe Ezra were they worthy of the preferred one again. The third opinion in the Talmud holds that the script never changed, meaning that although Paleo-Hebrew was in common use among the people, the higher script was always used for sacred purposes. In fact, there are those who explain that all opinions agree the Ten Commandments and possibly the original Torah of Moses were written in the Assyrian script, or the Kitab Ashhur, Ritva, Megillah, 2b, SV, etc., and so forth. And this author adds finally that in truth the whole issue is not really problematic, since by letter of law a Torah may be written in Greek, and according to one opinion in any language, Talmud Megillah 8b. Thus the change from one script of Hebrew to another was not technically forbidden, although clearly Ezra would not have taken it upon himself to institute so drastic a change without the Torah's approval. Rashba and Ritva to Megillah 2b. Yeah, some information on that. And information on the author, Rabbi David Rosenfeld, and probably a couple of books he's written and published there. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give us a like. Add your comments in the comment section below. We'll get back to you on those as soon as we can. And then go and share this video and our channel videos. Tell everyone else about us. Share it with everybody, right? So that they know the real truth, the whole truth, right? Without that fluff and BS that they're accustomed to. And we will see you on the next video, possibly about who were the Jews, who were the real Jews, and where did they originate from.